I would like to remain anonymous, because the things that happened to my family and me were very strange, and I wouldn't like them to think badly or something like that, but I swear that everything that happened to us was completely real. In a way, it is difficult for me to open the trunk of memories, precisely those times where I never had an answer to anything, and I don't think anyone in my family or the neighbors we live with has those things. But I do feel a little strange remembering all that and thinking that they are simply things that can happen to you just because they do or because they are eventual in certain places. A few days ago, when we were children, my 3 brothers and I lived with my parents in a house on the banks of a town of Zacatecas called El Sombrerete. That colony was new at that time, and one of the beautiful things about that colony was that it was located in the middle of some pear and apple orchards. One of those big orchards was right in front of some houses in that colony. It was a huge land, and that was very attractive to us at that age, because it was as if we had an infinite field of games for my brothers, the neighbors of the houses, and for me. In the back of the houses, there was a stream that went down from the dam that would be about 10 kilometers from the colony, and which served to water the gardens that were around. During the day it was completely beautiful, especially when it rained, since you could see waterfalls falling in the cliffs. The river had more current, and the smell of fruits and wet earth ran through the whole colony. And at night, all that did not change either, as the fireflies were seen due to the little public lighting of that area, and to close with a gold brooch, the stars, the moon, and everything in the sky, it was possible to visualize it without much difficulty, also illuminating all those huge fields. We had everything for a beautiful childhood in that place. A nice house, an almost infinite field to play at our leisure, cousins our age living almost next door, a moderately healthy economy, and our 2 parents always with us. And so we lived for a very good time since we arrived at that colony. But during a night that seemed to be going normally, like any other, we were all already in bed about to sleep when I began to hear that from outside, along with the wind, came the sound of a cry. It was as if a woman was suffering for something, but despite sounding strong, I knew they were coming from afar. When I heard this, I turned to see my brothers and they had a terror expression on their faces. I was left behind for nothing. None of us knew what to do or what to say. My mother ran to the room at that moment and sat down on the bed with me, telling us to cover ourselves and to pray. This sound lasted as long as I remember, I could say about 40 minutes, and really, throughout that time I felt the same fear as when that cry began, when suddenly, it simply stopped that night, returning to the usual silence of that colony during the nights, and even, I think, a little quieter than usual. I don't know how we could have slept that night, or at least I did. The next day, it was as if no one wanted to touch the subject in the colony. I don't know if it was my perception, but the expression on the faces of the neighbors was as if something worried them. I feel like they had also heard about last night. Everything was normal during the day, and when night came back, we did what we always do before going to sleep. And just like the day before, that cry came back, just like my mother in our room to tell us to pray and that nothing was wrong. And so it went for several days, or rather nights, in which we heard that cry, and it was no longer the same hours, but different. But there were days when it could no longer be differentiated whether they were male or female, for on some occasions that cry sounded as if it came from a man. In a way, we got used to all that. Yes, the sound woke me up, but I could go back to sleep and didn't feel the same fear as in the first days, however incredible it may sound. But even so, at least I never heard any neighbor or adult talk about it, and honestly, I didn't want to ask either. On December 24th, several families gathered at the house of an aunt who lived in that same neighborhood, of course, to celebrate. That whole day was the best. The typical family celebration, with dinner, music, the punch with piquete and everything. At high hours of the night, all the cousins went to sleep, while the adults or the cousins a little older, they were still at the party. After a while since I went to bed, a scream woke me up. After hearing that, I only heard that they had turned down the music, and after a few moments, I heard my aunts and uncles talking in one of the rooms upstairs. I thought it hadn't been anything serious, that maybe someone had fallen or something, I don't know. As I heard from afar that no one else was upset or screaming, I went back to sleep. But the next morning, I talked to my mom to ask her what had happened last night. And she, a little serious, told me, as if not wanting anyone else to hear, that during the party one of my uncles, who was one of the youngest, at that time he would be about 28 years old, separated for a moment from the family. He said that he wanted to clear his head for a moment and would go to the terrace and return immediately. Not long after, they heard him scream, but he was screaming for help. My uncles and my mom ran straight to the terrace, because they thought that something had fallen or something had happened to him. My mom was one of the first to get to the terrace, and she said she saw him on the floor, that he was too pale and only blabbered with a lost look. They helped him get up and they took him to one of the rooms inside the house. They sat him in one of the beds and tried to make him react, but all he said was that a man without skin wanted to take him. My uncles and my mom, when they heard this, thought that all of this was the result of what he had taken, out of tiredness, or for any other reason. They just didn't believe him. After a while, they were able to calm him down and he fell asleep. But my mom told me that in the morning, the neighbor who lives behind my aunt's house where the party was that night, told my mom, very worried, that she had seen a man in the dark of the terrace at dawn, who was standing watching towards the neighbor's house. And that she, seeing this, ran inside, when, with the little light of the patio of my aunt's house, she could see that, in his face, it seemed as if his skin were hanging or falling, but that out of fear she did not know what to do, and since they were all asleep in her house, she did not want to leave. My mother, when she heard this, was worried, and I noticed it, because the moment she was telling me everything, her expression left everything in evidence. But she told me, and she asked me to please not tell anyone, because she didn't even know what was happening. All the December parties were over. During that time, nothing similar happened again, and my uncle, whom I told you about, I could only see him once, and the truth was that he looked as if nothing had happened, or at least he looked very good. In the first days of January, my dad had gone back to work, and one night when he had stayed to work extra hours, my mom took my siblings and me to sleep with her in her room. We got comfortable and slept as always, but during the early morning, some slight pinches on my arm woke me up. When I opened my eyes, I saw my mom signaling with her hand to her lips for me to be silent, and she told me in a very low voice to listen. Still half asleep, I began to pay attention, and it was not long before I heard that someone or something was dragging between the feet of the bed and the door of the room, and in that place I could not see who or what it was, but I did not want to know either. It sounded as if something heavy was dragging itself. Slow, but it didn't sound as if it didn't want to be heard. My mother didn't say anything either, and after a few moments that seemed like an eternity, she told me to cover myself and pray in a low voice. That's how it was, and I did not know when or how I fell asleep, knowing that something that we did not see was moving in the room. At that time I was already beginning to listen to the neighbors talk about things that happened to them in their houses, that they heard voices or that someone was walking on their roofs at dawn. A neighbor proposed to bring the priest from the church, who was a little removed from there, to bless each of the houses. And the next day, that's how it was. In fact, I was surprised, now that I think about it, by the speed with which the priest agreed to come. And for a few weeks, everything was just as calm. Honestly, I did notice the contrast of what was happening to what stopped happening when the priest came. But for a while, my parents began to have problems. My father began to drink excessively, and that brought frequent discussions between the two. One night they discussed hotly in their room, and for us, being in our room, it was impossible to stop listening to every word and insult that was said. And suddenly a very loud sound came from outside. We recognized almost instantly that that sound was as if they had hit the balcony of our house. My brothers and I ran towards the window to see, and upon arrival, we saw that the railing that was facing the street was thrown, as if a car or something had hit it so hard that it had detached from the welds. But at the entrance and next to the railing was the strangest or most bizarre thing we could ever see in that place. At the entrance of the house, outside, was the back of a donkey. And when I say the back, it's because it literally was like that. Without a head, front legs or something. Just the back legs and a part of the back tail. One of my brothers, when he saw this, started to scream. And I was more than cold to see that. Well, really, I couldn't believe that that was so clear and shocking outside our house. I didn't listen to my parents for anything at that moment. And without being able to stop looking at that, without moving, I only saw how that thing walked towards the darkness, disappearing among the orchards. I grew up thinking that was something very bad, that in a way that thing had gone after my parents because of the conflicts they had. But I also thought that, since my brothers and I prayed often for my parents to stop fighting, it didn't happen to the adults and it would have only been a warning. Of all that, nothing was mentioned. But it was clear, by their expressions, I think, that my parents had seen what had been outside that night. A week later, during the afternoons that my brothers and I went out to play, I came back to drink water, and when I entered, I saw a man standing in the middle of the stairs. He was wearing mesh pants and a black shirt, but you couldn't see his face. And I say you couldn't see his face because he was standing in the middle of the stairs, and it was as if the top floor was covering his face. I ran as fast as I could and I only saw that that thing had stopped on the stairs. I ran with my mom, who was in the yard, and I told her right away. She told me that she had seen him a couple of times in the afternoon, and that's why she preferred that we go out to play at that time, and that she, for that very reason, also spent those hours outside. But she hadn't told us anything to keep us from getting scared. Needless to say, that's why I preferred to play outside even more in the afternoons. Things between my parents got worse, to the point that my mother decided to start sleeping in my younger sister's room on the floor below. One night, after my dad went to sleep angry with my mom and us, after hours during the morning, we woke up with screams and cries from above. We left our room and almost at the same time my dad came out. He looked a little upset and was saying that my mom was hugging him. But in that, my mother was going up with my younger sister down the stairs, to which we tried to tell her that everything had been perhaps a dream or that she had imagined it. And my father, even at this point and above all that we had gone through, said that it probably had been that, and he kept on believing nothing we had told him. What we had seen and what we had been living for some time now. From that night on, it was frequent for many noises to wake us up in the early morning. They would open doors with a bang, slam windows, turn on the stereo or the television at the highest volume, and we never understood why or how. It was getting harder and harder for us to sleep well, and it got a little worse. Days later, while I was studying at night in my room, suddenly I started to feel as if the atmosphere in that room got very heavy. From one moment to another, I don't know why, I felt very tired, so I turned off the light, closed the door, I settled my things and went to bed. Shortly after I started to sleep, the movement of the bed woke me up, as if someone had climbed up. I thought someone had entered, but at that point I was not sleeping enough not to have heard that someone had opened the door. And the truth is that I was afraid, so I hid my head and ran to the edge of the bed that was stuck to the wall, but outside the sheets I could feel someone's breath or something, and I didn't want to move a centimeter at all, because I was afraid that would do something to me if it knew I was awake. So a couple of nights passed by, in which I didn't even realize at what point I was asleep. But despite that, I felt that I had not rested at all. Soon I woke up again, went to my classes tired, in a bad mood, and I was afraid to go home or to stay up. I told my parents, carefully not to listen to my brothers, but no one believed me. So I convinced my mother to sleep with me one night, and that night I could finally sleep peacefully. But at dawn, my mother told me when I saw her in the kitchen that she believed me, because last night she said she had felt as if someone was sitting on her head. She was lying down on her side and could not move. She just felt how they pressed her head against the mattress with great force. And she, without moving, just moved her gaze to all sides, trying to see what was pressing her head. And in a mirror she had in her room, she told me that she managed to see a small being, with the little light that came in from outside. She could see that it was very ugly. She said it was as if it were a combination of a small human and a goat, but red, and that she doesn't know at what moment she fell asleep. After a few years in which that kind of events decreased to just noises at night, I left the town to study with my brother, who at that time was almost the same age as me. But after he changed me to the city and we started renting a house between my brother and me, we had to change often. Well, it was as if that was following me. Those events were repeated over the nights that I already told you, and therefore I could not give my all in my days, and that was my solution: to change houses very often. One night, I was arriving home after a party, and when I entered, I heard my brother screaming from his room to the back of the house. I ran, and when I arrived, I turned on the light and woke him up. But he told me that he was not asleep but that he could not open his eyes and that somehow he had seen a man standing next to his bed just before I arrived. I calmed him down as much as I could and tried to convince him that it had been a nightmare, because I entered and there was no one in the room, and that calmed him down a little too, and we went to sleep in the living room. The next day, my brother went to visit my parents in town, and I stayed in the city. I went out that night to dinner with some friends and I did not return very late to the house. So I turned on the television to see if I could get some sleep. After a while my eyes started to weigh, so I turned it off and went to my room. When I lay down, I did not feel comfortable. I could not find a comfortable position to sleep, so I decided to sleep with my head on the bedside and my feet on the headboard to see if this would help me in something. I was already falling asleep when I felt a very strong squeeze in my ankle. Almost instantly, I turned on the light of my lamp that was close, and I didn't see anything, but in my ankle, I had a marked hand, like when someone tightens your skin very hard. I changed as quickly as I could from that house, and it was a bit easy for me, because a friend was also looking for a place to rent, and between my brother, she, and I, we found a quick and cheap place. The only bad thing about that house was that the rooms didn't have a door. It only separated us a couple of curtains that we had hanging in the frames where the doors of each room were supposed to go. Everything went smoothly in that house for a while when, like the previous occasions, I was left alone in the house, because my brother had returned to town a few days ago and my friend had gone with his family too. And it seemed as if that knew that I was completely alone. Well, on the first night, I really slept a little quiet, because the fact that nothing had happened in that house since we had changed calmed me down a lot, and I thought that it would stay that way. I looked out the window as I fell asleep, as a very fresh wind was coming in, and the moon was illuminating the window and the room in a very beautiful way. When I heard the curtains shaking around the doors, I turned around with my eyes open and saw, as if a man or the silhouette of a man entered through the curtains. He was of medium stature, very thin, and as little as I could see, he seemed to have a little long beard. Even with the light of the moon, I could not see beyond the dark silhouette. He approached, and until that moment I had not realized that I could not move at all. I could only turn my eyes and see that, being close enough to me, next to the bed, he got on my legs and raised me with his arms as if sitting on the bed. I felt everything very cold around me, and I felt my head hanging without being able to lift it or straighten it, as if my body were a trap. When he lifted me up, I could see very little because of how my head was positioned, but I just felt how he was looking at me, and he approached me in the ear and I just heard him say, "No, you don't." He lay down again, got out of bed, and disappeared between the curtains of the door. When he left, I could finally move. I began to cry, and as I stood up from bed to turn on the lights and look for him everywhere, I checked the rooms, the bathroom, the kitchen. All the doors had a key. It was clear that he had not entered or left. Really, he had not entered. I don't know if what happened to me had an origin or an end, but I'll just tell you what I lived. I didn't see that or live something like that again, but after that, I kept changing houses very often. Then I write you other experiences that triggered all that.